In the summer of 2023, Emily Parker, a passionate young blogger known for her wild nature explorations, set out to the Everglades swamps in Florida. With her camera in hand, she aimed to capture the mysterious landscapes few had ever ventured into. But from that trip onward, Emily never returned. A year passed in vain, no trace, no clue. All hope seemed lost until a seasoned fisherman hauled up a crab trap from the deep waters near the shore and discovered an unexpected piece of evidence, a phone covered in algae sunken deep beneath the cold water. That phone became a challenge, revealing a darker and more painful story than anyone had ever imagined. Early one July morning in 2023, as the sun barely rose over the eastern horizon of Naples, Florida, John McCarthy woke up as usual. Nearly 40 years living between the salty ocean and the Everglades marshlands had made him one of the most experienced fishermen in the area. His hands were rough and calloused with time, yet every movement remained swift and practiced as he steered his small boat out to sea. The swamps and rising waters around Naples were not just a source of livelihood, but also home, a place filled with countless mysterious stories he had witnessed throughout his life. The vast sea could swallow a person whole and conceal the darkest secrets. The boat glided gently across the water, the soft hum of the diesel engine blending with the steady sound of lapping waves. John watched the dawn's light shimmer on the mangrove trees, the lingering mist sparkling like diamonds on the sea's surface. In his mind, memories of the past year, a year of silence and unanswered questions, began to resurface. In his hands was the familiar crab trap hoist equipment that had supported him for decades. Slowly, he maneuvered the crane to pull the trap from the seabed about 40 feet deep. The trap was heavy, filled with blue crabs and wriggling sea creatures, but something unusual caught John's attention. A vivid pink hue stood out sharply against the deep greens of the crabs. He carefully opened the trap, making sure not to disturb the clamoring crabs. Suddenly, his hand touched a hard, cold object covered in a layer of green algae and small marine creatures firmly attached. It was an iPhone forgotten and submerged in cold water at the bottom of the sea for weeks or possibly months. John examined it closely. The faded pink case was worn and corroded by algae. A strange feeling swept over him. This was no ordinary item to be found in a crab trap. He recalled stories of disappearances in the mysterious Everglades and felt a chill deep inside. This phone might be an important clue. Without hesitation, John wrapped the phone carefully in a cloth and hurried back to the dock. His heavy steps echoed on the wet wood as he entered the Collier County Sheriff's Office, handing over the strange evidence to the lead detective who promised to uncover the truth. Detective Patricia Nguyen, in charge of the missing person case, quickly coordinated with the forensic tech and cyber investigation teams. Although the iPhone was badly damaged by salt water, the police had low expectations of extracting data directly from the device. Fortunately, Emily Parker was a well-known blogger who regularly backed up her videos and photos to cloud services such as iCloud and YouTube before her final expedition. With proper legal authorization, the police accessed Emily's online accounts, discovering her last recorded videos of vibrant and lively Emily paddling her kayak through the untouched channels of the Everglades. In the footage, she spoke excitedly about a secret fishing spot known among local fishermen, pinpointed within the sprawling maze of the 10,000 islands, a dense network of mangroves and waterways fraught with danger. This information opened a new investigative lead, allowing search teams to focus their efforts around Emily's last known coordinates in the vast wetlands and waters. Michael Parker. Emily's father had never given up hope, despite nearly a year without news. Upon receiving word about the phone and the videos recovered from the cloud, he felt a mixture of joy and anxiety, unsure if this was a breakthrough or merely another painful step in his search. The expansive Everglades, full of challenges and peril, continued to guard its secrets in the shadows. But with this new clue, the Marine Patrol and Michael's family embarked on a renewed quest, bolstered by a stronger belief than ever before. Soon after receiving data from the cloud accounts, Detective Patricia Nguyen and her team quickly planned to expand the search based on Emily Parker's last known coordinates. The Everglades, a vast area of over 10,000 small islands and a complex network of winding channels, harbored deep mysteries few could fully comprehend. That afternoon, Patricia and the Marine Patrol boarded a small patrol boat, gliding past dense mangrove forests and thick reeds. The calm water was only broken by the engine's hum and distant calls of birds. Emily's final coordinates pointed to a narrow, winding channel heavily covered by mangrove canopy, forming a natural maze. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow, creating a place both beautiful and eerily foreboding. Patricia sensed an unusual stillness, a silence that was not peaceful, but a sign of hidden secrets waiting to be uncovered. Meanwhile, Michael Parker stood at Goodland Dock, his gaze distant over the sea. Memories of his last conversations with his daughter flashed through his mind, her excited voice telling stories of her adventures. The weight of loss pressed heavily on his shoulders, yet his resolve remained unbroken. He had hired private investigators and organized search groups, but until now, no sign had emerged to tell if Emily was alive or what horrors she might have faced. Now, with a new clue, a phone, and recovered videos, he felt renewed strength, knowing the journey ahead would be dangerous. On the patrol boat, Patricia briefed her team about the risks of the Everglades' swirling currents, lurking alligators beneath the water, and inaccessible flooded lands. At every stop, they conducted thorough surveys, mapping terrain and collecting water samples, searching for the faintest clue. Despite modern technology, the greatest challenge was the environment itself, the shifting channels shaped constantly by tide storms and heavy rains. At the day's end, they received a tip from a local fisherman who spotted a kayak drifting near shallow waters, not far from shore. It might have been Emily's. The team hurried to the scene, finding damaged personal belongings, including a broken camera and signs of a struggle. This suggested Emily could have faced serious danger. Michael's heart clenched upon hearing the news. Things were becoming clearer, but also more painful. He knew time was running out. A new day dawned with faint rays piercing through the thin mist that hung over the Everglades. Yet the atmosphere among the investigation team was anything but light. Tension and heaviness grew with every passing hour. Detective Patricia Nguyen and her colleagues faced not only the wild complexities of nature, but also a merciless enemy, time. After the search at the site where the kayak and personal belongings were found, the team uncovered several troubling signs. Footprints along the shore, tears in the discarded clothing, and signs of a struggle suggested Emily had fought back in her final moments. However, the vast area showed no clear trace of a second person. Investigators found no evidence of any boats or vehicles near the area during that time frame, casting doubt on the possibility of outside assistance or surveillance. Michael Parker, the steadfast father, struggled to maintain his composure, while waves of anxiety and despair crashed within. He spent long hours watching his daughter's final videos over and over, searching for any small clue that might shed light on what had happened. Every time his eyes rested on the vibrant, strong image of Emily, it was like a dagger to his heart. But he knew he could not falter or give up. His unwavering strength inspired the investigation team, fueling their relentless pursuit of the truth. Meanwhile, Patricia consulted local ecologists and environmental experts to better understand the region's unique characteristics. The Everglades was not only a complex water system, but also home to many dangerous creatures, alligators, venomous snakes, and disease-carrying insects. Every step into the mangrove swamp carried potential peril. They also learned that the swift currents around Emily's last known coordinates could quickly carry away any fallen objects, partly explaining why finding traces of her had been so difficult. More suspiciously, some local fishermen revealed that in recent months they had seen small boats moving covertly through the channels, usually at night. Rumors suggested illegal human trafficking or smuggling might be happening in the area. Determined to uncover the truth, Patricia expanded the investigation, coordinating with Border Patrol and federal agencies to inspect suspicious activities. A complex picture began to emerge, far more complicated than they had initially imagined. The next day, as sunlight faded behind the mangrove canopy, the investigation team pressed deeper into the Everglades maze. Patricia led the patrol, her eyes scanning every small sign on the damp ground, a broken branch, a faint footprint along the canal bank. Every detail was carefully documented, pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together, though the picture emerging was far from simple. A few more personal items were recovered, including a fragment of Emily's camera, some scattered coins and dried blood, all strewn along a narrow trail, clear signs of hurried movement through the dense swamp. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Michael Parker remained in constant contact with the team through calls and video briefings. Sleepless and heavy with grief, he clung to his resolve and belief in justice. He knew every scrap of information the team uncovered could be a critical piece, one step closer to revealing his daughter's fate. In a separate development, the team received a tip from a local fisherman about an abandoned riverside warehouse at the edge of the search zone, a place where small boats had been seen coming and going at night. The team moved quickly to the site and found evidence that it had been used as a staging area for illegal cargo, possibly tied to human trafficking. Inside the warehouse, the sight of old chains, rusty locks, and personal belongings left behind made the air thick and unsettling. Patricia sensed the case had already grown beyond the scope of a simple missing person. A criminal organization could be operating in the Everglades shadows, exploiting the terrain's complexity to conceal its illegal trade. Unease spread through the team as they realized the safety of everyone in the area could be under serious threat. Under mounting pressure, Patricia coordinated with federal agencies like the FBI and Border Patrol to expand the investigation, planning to strike at suspected hotspots. Meanwhile, Michael Parker received updates and prepared to fly to Florida to join the effort in person. The anguish and determination tore at him, but he knew his presence might bring strength to the team and to Emily herself. That evening at the command post, yellow light glowed across a sprawling map of the Everglades, marked with notes and pins that formed a complex web. Patricia stood at the table, staring at the coordinates and numbers, her mind working through possible scenarios. What they knew so far was only the tip of the iceberg. So many secrets remained hidden, so many questions unanswered, and in that darkness, time was no ally but the most fearsome enemy. That night, a sudden downpour drenched the Everglades, heavy and relentless, turning dirt roads slick and the canals muddy and more treacherous. At the temporary command post, lights still glowed, maps spread wide, and radios crackled with fragmented reports. Patricia stood quietly in a corner, clutching a file, eyes fixed on the new coordinates being marked on the map. The latest intelligence from the FBI revealed that the area around the abandoned warehouse wasn't just a drop-off point, but part of a cross-border trafficking route, connecting directly from Cuba to Florida. For months, shipments of people had moved stealthily through the dark channels of the swamp late at night. Michael Parker arrived on a red-eye flight into Southwest Florida Airport, his face gaunt, yet his eyes sharper, when he spotted Patricia waiting in the terminal. He didn't ask anything, just gripped her hand firmly before following her to the car. On the drive to the command post, she briefed him on the newest developments, evidence pointing to an organized human trafficking ring, aided by locals posing as ordinary fishermen and boat captains. Michael stared out the rain-streaked window, hearing in his mind his daughter's faint voice calling for him in the last video he'd watched 1,000 times. At dawn, the patrol units and federal agents launched coordinated raids on several suspected sites. Long black SUVs sped down narrow roads, cutting through the marsh headlights, slicing through the morning mist. A helicopter tracked overhead, its loudspeaker echoing warnings, while teams in body armor, carrying weapons and detection gear, fanned out into the mangroves. Engines roared, boots pounded wet ground, orders barked over radios. Michael sat waiting at the perimeter, his heartbeat matching every distant radio transmission. By late morning at a small wooden shack deep in the forest, the tactical team uncovered a group, mostly women and children, bound and huddled in a filthy room, terrified as the door was kicked open. Medics rushed in, freeing and tending to them while suspects were dragged out under tight guard. Some familiar faces appeared among the captives' fishermen who'd casually answered questions days earlier, now revealed as links in the trafficking chain. But Michael still didn't see Emily. He threw the car door open and strode forward, eyes darting over each rescued victim, hope and dread twisting in every breath. Patricia stepped up behind him, laying a firm hand on his shoulder, her voice low but decisive. "There's one more site. This isn't the end. Everything points to an old riverside plant where they keep the ones they don't want found." Michael didn't reply, just nodded, his eyes burning, now hands shaking as they clenched at the edge of his jacket. He knew that was where Emily had to be, and nothing would stop him from getting there, even if it cost him his life. Patricia ushered him back to the car. The convoy turned and sped toward the Caloosahatchee River, where an abandoned fish processing plant stood on the shore long known only through whispered stories of midnight deliveries. Through the rain-smeared window, Michael watched the mangroves slip past, giving way to an uneven clearing, overgrown with weeds, sheets of rusted metal rattling in the wind. The plant came into view, looming dark and silent, like a massive trap, waiting for anyone who dared to enter. The tactical units fanned out surrounding the entire property. Flashlights swept across shadows. Sharp commands cut through the air, mixed with the sound of raindrops tapping the corrugated roof. Michael paused for a moment at the threshold, staring deep into the black entrance of the plant, taking a long breath to steady the trembling in his chest. Just a few more steps, and he would finally face the truth he'd been chasing for over a year. The steel door of the abandoned fish plant screeched as one of the tactical agents pushed it open, flashlight beams slicing through the damp darkness inside, casting light over mold-streaked walls and torn fishing nets sagging from the ceiling. The air was thick with salt rust and an unidentifiable stench. Michael followed close behind Patricia, his shoes sinking slightly into the soggy floor, each footstep echoing like the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. He scanned the shadows, every sense sharp, swallowing the bleak details around him, searching for any sign of Emily. The tactical team fanned out, splitting into groups, clearing the abandoned cold rooms and long, narrow corridors that stretched into blackness like tunnels. Rats scurried from heaps of rotting nets and toppled styrofoam crates, startled by the lights. A young officer yanked hard on a heavy steel door at the end of a corridor. Its hinges screamed before falling silent, leaving only the gaping void of darkness beyond. Michael stepped to the threshold, staring down the stairwell that led into a damp basement, the beam of a flashlight from below catching on the slick, moss-covered steps. He held his breath, heart hammering, and placed his hand on the rail as he descended. The air below was metallic cold and heavy, like night fog biting into his lungs. Flashlights wavered over concrete walls marred with grime and faint handprints, old chains bolted to steel pillars, their surfaces scarred and pitted. At the far end of the basement, a small steel door stood shut, a heavy padlock hanging from it, until one agent shattered it with a single shot. The door swung open with a groan that cut through the silence. Flashlights poured into a narrow cell barely big enough for one person to sit. Michael stepped inside, his eyes locking on the figure curled up in the corner. Emily. Her frail body was wrapped in a thin, damp blanket, eyes blinking against the sudden light, hands trembling as she reached for the wall to pull herself up. Her hair was matted, filthy bruises, old and new, blotched her arms and neck. The moment her gaze met his, something sparked disbelief, fear, and then recognition, and she let out a hoarse, broken whisper. "Dad." Michael dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms, not caring that her body was cold, limp, almost melting against him. He bent close, his voice cracking as he whispered into her ear, "I'm here now. It's over. I'm taking you home." She clung to his jacket, sobs finally breaking free, mingling with the muffled footsteps of agents moving through the hallway, and radio chatter reporting that the key suspects had been secured. Another team moved in quickly, wrapping Emily in a thermal blanket, checking her pulse and condition before carefully lifting her to her feet and guiding her out of the basement. Michael held her steady as they climbed the cold, narrow stairs, flashlight beams catching the tears streaking his cheeks, soaking into the damp collar of his coat. Outside, an ambulance waited with its lights already flashing, medics rushing forward with a stretcher and more blankets. He never let go of her hand, his eyes locked on her face, as if afraid she'd vanish before his eyes. The wail of the ambulance siren rose red, and blue lights flashing against the cracked walls of the plant reflected in Michael's eyes the light of hope rekindled, but also the quiet, simmering fury at those who had dragged his daughter through a year of hell. He knew this wasn't over. He still owed Emily justice, and he wouldn't stop until every last person in this ring was dragged into the light. Inside the emergency room at Naples Hospital, the air was thick with antiseptic and the cold glare of fluorescent lights. Emily lay on the bed, wrapped in layers of thermal blankets, her hands pale and frail bruises running from her neck to her wrists. Doctors and nurses moved in and out, checking her pulse, administering IV fluids, cleaning and dressing the sores left by months of captivity. Michael stood at her side, never taking his eyes off her, his hand gripping hers tightly, feeling every faint beat in her wrist, reminding himself she was alive still here. Patricia approached the bed, carrying a fresh file and a few hastily printed photographs. She set them on the side table, her steady eyes meeting Michael's. "We've interviewed the rescued victims, and—" Emily managed to tell us a few things. Her tone darkened. She remembered his face, the one who made her life hell, Wade Corbin. Michael glanced down at Emily, seeing her lips part, as if to speak, then close again, her strength faltering. A tear slid down her cheek as her hand clutched his tighter. That name, he knew it. He'd seen it in one of the recovered videos from the cloud. A man who had seemed so ordinary, even likable now, unmasked as the monster running the entire operation, keeping Emily as his personal prisoner while others were sold off in the shadows. Patricia flipped the file open, pointing to a photo of Corbin in cuffs, his face still wearing a faint, smug smile. "We picked him up at the dock early this morning. But—" her voice hardened. "He's refusing to talk. He's demanding only one thing to negotiate face-to-face with Michael Parker." Michael felt his blood rise to his temples, his chest tightening at her words. He looked down at Emily, her eyes half open now, staring up at him with a pleading look, silently begging him not to take the risk. But he knew he couldn't back down. Not now. If this was the only way to learn the whole truth, he would do it. He nodded at Patricia, his voice rough and low. "Set it up. I'll meet him." That afternoon, Michael was led into the county jail's interview room. The small, cold space was lit by a single overhead lamp, a steel table, and a set of shackles already waiting. Wade Corbin was already there, seated casually, his hands cuffed in front of him, but his expression calm, even amused. He looked up as Michael entered, offering a faint smile as the door closed behind them. They sat opposite each other, nothing between them. Michael's glare was full of fire and hate. Corbin tilted his head slightly, his gray-blue eyes glinting with mockery. "You came. I knew you would. The cops can threaten, they can squeeze, but someone like you? You've got motivation. You've got what I need." Michael said nothing, his fists tightening. Corbin chuckled, lowering his voice, as though savoring the moment. "I know what you want, your girl, justice. But I've got what I want too. I want out of here. A clean passport. A one-way ticket out of this country. In exchange, I'll give you everything. Every stash house, every dock, every name that hasn't come to light yet. All the ones still in chains waiting for someone to find them." Michael felt his rage boil higher, his hands trembling, but his voice stayed ice cold. "You think you deserve to demand anything? After what you did to her? To all of them?" Corbin only shrugged his sharp eyes, unflinching. "I'm the only one who can help you. And you know it." Outside the interrogation room, Patricia and a team of agents watched silently through the camera feed, everyone holding their breath. Inside, Michael leaned forward, his eyes dark and hard as stone. "You're going to pay for what you did, but you're going to talk, now." Corbin smiled faintly, leaned back, and began speaking. One by one, names, addresses. Coordinates fell from his lips, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving Michael's, as if daring him to react. Michael memorized every word, every number, every detail. He knew Corbin was playing his game, but he also knew he was already halfway to winning it. Immediately after Corbin began talking, an operation was launched at full speed. Maps of the Everglades and the surrounding coastline were soon covered with marks and coordinates, warehouse names, dock sites, nicknames of key players he listed, forming a complete web exposing an entrenched trafficking ring that had quietly fed on this land for years. Patricia, the tactical teams and federal agents organized into units, vehicles and weapons were prepared, support was arranged. Michael stood silently watching it all, his face no longer weary, but sharp and cold with resolve. He knew tonight would decide everything. The Florida sky hung heavy and smelled of salt as the convoy of black SUVs rolled out from headquarters headlights, cutting through a light drizzle. In the back seat, Michael clutched the folded map tightly, his eyes fixed on the darkest circled point, an isolated riverside warehouse along the Tamiami Trail, described by Corbin as the final stop, the place where those deemed worthless were left behind or shipped out to sea, never to return. No one spoke the entire ride, only the hum of tires over wet earth and the low howl of wind outside. The vehicles pulled up outside the warehouse, where rusted sheets of corrugated metal groaned in the night wind, flashlight beams sweeping over fresh tire tracks and mud. Patricia signaled, and the tactical units moved swiftly, surrounding all sides. The click of rounds being chambered mingled with the heavy breaths of men and women about to step into hell. Michael stepped out his shoes, sinking into the mud, his gaze fixed on the tall gray steel door ahead, each heartbeat pushing him closer to it. A sharp command was shouted. The door burst open. White beams of light flooded in, cutting through the darkness, revealing rows of bare pillars, makeshift cages lined against the walls, tattered mattresses reeking of damp and decay. Inside, about 20 people, mostly women and children, huddled in fear, their eyes wide with terror, but glinting with fragile hope as the agents approached. Chains clattered as they were undone, gentle reassurances met quiet sobs. Michael moved between the pillars, his eyes sweeping each face, his heart sinking as he saw Emily wasn't here. He turned to Patricia, who met his look with a small nod before pointing down the far hallway at a final door at the end of the shadows. Without hesitating, he strode to it, his hand gripping the cold knob and pushing hard. The narrow room opened light, spilling in on a girl wrapped in a thin blanket, gripping the edge of an iron cot, her hollow eyes suddenly flaring with life as she saw him. It wasn't Emily, but something in her gaze struck him, the realization that there were so many more Emilys still out there, still trapped somewhere in the dark. He turned back, walking into the main warehouse floor, where the suspects now sat bound on the ground. One of them looked up and smirked, faintly mocking. Michael stepped forward, crouching, his voice low, and steel-edged his eyes like blades. "Every last one of you. You're not getting away." Outside, ambulances began pulling away, one by one, red and blue lights flashing against the cracked walls, and warped roofing sirens cutting through the rain-soaked night. Michael lingered in the doorway for a moment, breathing deep, his hand trembling faintly, but his eyes burning bright. He knew this wasn't the end, and he swore to himself, for Emily, for every pair of eyes that looked at him tonight, as they were freed, he would keep going, chasing these men to the very end of the line. A week after the final raid, the lights of Naples Hospital still burned through the night, the quiet hallways echoing with the soft footsteps of nurses. In the ICU, Emily Parker was fully awake now, her eyes no longer wild with fear, as on the day she was found, but calm, weary, and resilient. Michael sat by her bedside, his hand gently clasping hers as though afraid she might slip away again. Doctors came and went, reporting she was out of immediate danger. Her wounds were healing, her body slowly regaining strength, but the scars on her soul would linger much longer. He listened, nodded, but never once took his eyes off her, his determination as steady as ever. He would carry the weight of the world, if that's what it took for her to stand again. On the television, mounted in the waiting room, the evening news ran story after story about the largest human trafficking bust in Florida in a decade. Familiar images flashed across the screen, Corbin being led away in an orange jumpsuit. His smug expression gone, the other suspects handcuffed, heads down, as they were ushered from the federal courthouse. Reporters spoke of confessions, of charges filed, of dozens of victims rescued. But Michael didn't watch. He already knew none of them would escape now. The next morning, Emily was allowed outside for the first time. Michael wheeled her slowly through the small garden behind the hospital, where early sunlight glistened off dew on the grass. She drew a long breath, tilting her face toward the warmth, her thin hands trembling faintly. He leaned down, murmuring to her, "I promised, and I kept my promise. You came home." Emily turned her head, looking up at him, a faint, fragile smile breaking across her lips as she whispered, her voice soft but steady, "We still have more to find, don't we?" He nodded. In that moment, he saw the same fire in her eyes, the fire that had never gone out, even after a year in hell. That afternoon, Michael met Patricia again at the precinct. She shook his hand, her eyes tired but firm. "The rest, we'll take it from here. You've done enough." He gripped her hand hard, his eyes still burning. "I'm not stopping." "Not now." Patricia only nodded, saying nothing. That night back home, Michael stood at the window of his living room, staring out at the dark ocean beyond. The wind carried in the smell of salt and damp. He closed his eyes, drawing in a long breath, hearing again the footsteps, the chains, the faint cries of the ones still waiting to be saved. Emily slept in the next room, but he knew her sleep would still be haunted, just like his own. Later, he opened his laptop, placing a call to Patricia. Their eyes met through the screen, neither wasting words. He spoke plainly, his voice low and steady. "I want names, locations, files, everything you have." She hesitated, then nodded slowly, her voice measured. "We won't let them disappear. I'll send it all to you. But Michael, be ready. This road, it's longer than you think." His reply was cold steel. "I'm not afraid." Outside the window, waves rolled steadily against the shore, unending, unrelenting. Michael rested his hand on the keyboard, eyes locked on the list of names already on the screen. He knew the fight was far from over, but he also knew he would keep walking step by step until there wasn't a single Emily left in the dark.